So the book is not just about big waves, as the title suggests. Can you tell us how you married those three groups of mariners, scientists, and big wave riders?
The book is really about giant waves, but there are a number of different kinds. And so there are, let's just take a 100-foot wave. You could have a 100-foot wave out here that, would be every tow surfer's dream. Or you could have a 100-foot wave that's hitting a ship in 40-foot seas. And that would be a rogue wave. The term rogue wave gets used a lot, freak wave, and it's used in the vernacular, but what scientists mean when they say it is a wave that's at least 2 times as big as the seas around it, and possibly 3 or 4 or even bigger. And those waves are very unusual. They're not well understood. It was only in 1995 when scientists kind of acquiesced that they existed. Prior to that, they thought they were kind of tall tales of the sea, and the captains whose boats got damaged would sort of say, yes, it was such a huge wave. And there were lots of rumors of them. Ernest Shackleton, the great polar explorer, hit a 100-foot rogue wave crossing the Southern Ocean to get help. And that, he thought at first it was, clouds in the sky at night, and then he realized that in probably 30-something foot seas, there was this 100-foot rogue wave, and it was so big that he literally thought it was in the clouds above, and that can't have been a good moment when you realize that's not clouds in the sky, it's actually a wave towering over you. But so rogue waves are very mysterious beasts, and in fact, one of the chapters in the book takes place in this hotel where all the top wave scientists had convened to discuss some of the sort of unknowns, the climate model, the sort of limitations of climate modeling, because they were not predicting these giant waves. They were losing a lot of ships. And then, of course, there were things that had, again, not been really well understood. Like when Katrina breached New Orleans, nobody really thought that storm surge was going to be quite as big as it was. Like, our hurricane modeling was not where it needed to be. Our knowledge of the ocean in its most extreme was not where it needed to be. And certainly our knowledge of these nonlinear, really weird, monstrous rogue waves was very much in its infancy. But in the beginning, I was especially fascinated by rogue waves because I read an article in the New York Times that said that 2 large ships a week were disappearing, freighters, 1,000-foot ships. And so you lose a 1,000-foot ship twice a week, and nobody hears about it. And to me, a lot of the stories that really capture my interest start with the question, what do you mean that, there's a neighborhood of great white sharks in San Francisco? Or what do you mean that there's guys trying to surf a 100-foot wave? Or what do you mean that they're losing 1,000-foot ships a week in an era where we can find atoms? And so that was a really driving force of the book. And then the third type of wave that I really focused on was tsunamis, which are, again, really interesting, not well understood, but better understood than they have been. And we've had 2 major tsunamis in the past 7 years. But if you go back as recently as 250 years, there were much bigger tsunamis. And if you go back to prehistory, where they're starting to dig up the seabed, especially around here, and look and see, there have been mega tsunamis. I mean, this is something that happens in the world, and I could go on about this for a long time, but changes in climate lead to changes in earthquake frequency and volcanic activity, which in turn are really related to tsunamis. So I set out to find anybody who could take me either literally or figuratively to the top of one of these waves, into these waves, so that I could understand it well enough to, by extension, take readers.
And if looking at the 3 groups of people that you studied in this book, which of the 3 do you think are more in tune with the ocean and what it can do?
There's no doubt whatsoever that the big wave surfers that I spoke to are the shamans of the ocean. They understand the ocean in a way that, I mean, if you talk to an astronaut and who's been to the moon, they can understand the moon in a way that all the guys sitting in mission control, they may be the most brilliant people in the world at their computer monitors, and I met so many brilliant people writing this book, but they are not going to understand it in that sort of gut, heart way that the people who are actually in the element understand. And in fact, a lot of the scientists that I spoke to never went to sea. They, a few of them did, but most of them don't want to. And a lot of the really scientific work on waves is very mathematical, and in fact, in the case of rogue waves, it's very quantum physics and things like that. So they're the same mind that wants to unravel these equations. Like if you look at an equation for a nonlinear wave, it really looks like chickens stepped in ink and walked around on a piece of paper. Like it's so complicated. It's unbelievable, and they're so smart, but they're not necessarily seagoing people. And of course, then you have the other group that was really aware of the ocean in a very personal, emotional way were the ship captains. And their lives depend on it every day. Yeah.
Well, I was pretty impressed, Susan, that you got out there. And in the book, she even talks about before the jet ski, you actually swim out on a pretty flat day, though there's no such thing really as flat, but a pretty flat day with Laird, and that was even knowing that there are sharks in the world.
Oh, well, you know, I honestly, like, I always think if I see a shark, it's a good day. It's like if you think you're going to see a shark, you know, get a lottery ticket that day, because that's how rare they are. But, yeah, we swam out to Jaws because I wanted to see the reef. I wanted to see if, they talked about a fan-shaped reef, and I thought, I'd like to see that. And National Geographic did some bathymetry graphics on it, and so I wanted to see, but when I got out there, I realized you almost have to be above to see because it's so big. But I did get to see how incredibly elemental and spooky the water is there. I mean, there is a set of jaws down there, the giant boulders, and Laird he trusted that, I guess, if there was some trouble, that I could be reasonably counted upon to handle myself. And he did take me into some pretty extreme conditions at times. He took me through the barrel at Chopu on a jet ski, took me down Jaws, not on the biggest day, but it was big enough for me, on a jet ski. And I got to see a lot more firsthand and feel a lot more firsthand what was going on. Of course, nothing compared to what they go through. And yet, I had the same experience with being around very big waves that I did being around very big sharks, is that when you're actually in the moment, and you're less scared because you're very present. There's this awesome, beautiful thing that's so much more powerful than you are. And you forget yourself, and you're just in it. And I think that I learned that fear is a projection, that you're projecting what might happen to you or what happened in the past to you. That doesn't really happen when you're very, very present. And I think that incredible moment of being just really in it is what attracts people to surfing at all levels. You're really in that moment. That's what people meditate in a cave for 30 years to do. So.
Well, there's a story in the book with Brett Lickle and one of the hugest waves at another place that they call Egypt out there. And I'm wondering, having read the book, when they came in, this was a day of just gargantuan, cartoonish proportions that may sound unbelievable because no one was really there to document it. But given the history and the validity that Laird and these guys have, I mean, they really do ride these ridiculous waves. They came in and it was a shocking experience that they had. Can you fill us in, just without spoiling the story, but a little bit on that day? And were they able to convey to you that moment that you talk about when it was all said and done?
I had to pry that out of them over the course of 6 weeks. I had to report all around that incident to find out what had happened. I mean, Brett Lickle almost lost his life. Laird saved him. He stripped off his wetsuit, tied a tourniquet, came up on Baldwin Beach naked. I mean, it's the craziest thing. There was only 5 or 6 people who could really talk about it. And I just spent a long time. I'm a really immersive journalist, and I will ask the same question 100 times and follow the person around until I get it. And what was really great was that everybody had kind of the same story. They don't brag about it. They don't want to go around saying these were the biggest waves they'd ever ridden, but I found that out. And you know, I think I would like to ask Pat Caldwell if one of the reasons they put that buoy off of Maui is because of this day, because that was fairly bizarre what happened that day. They expected 40-foot waves, and they, according to Don Shearer, I'll let Derek also talk about Don Shearer, so I'm not going to speak to his credibility. I'm going to let Derek speak to his credibility. Said that he knows that there were 100-foot waves there, and there were probably even 120-foot waves there. And nobody predicted that, and it was very strange visibility. The airport was on VFR, so the pilots were making their approach very slowly and fully on instruments right till they landed. So there was no way for Don in his helicopter to fly around and like he usually does, like in the picture that you saw. It's just the weirdest day that ever happened, and it reminded me a little bit of when I was at Outside, we had sent John Krakauer to Mount Everest to figure out what was going on with people being guided up Everest. And one of the questions we had was, should people be able to be guided up Everest? And of course, this incredible series of events unfolded, which I'm sure most people here are familiar with. And it was like that on that day. Like, it was just a weird confluence of extremes. And it was it forms the climax of the book, I think, in a lot of ways. It's amazing, actually, that they all got out of there that day. It really is.
And it was a life-changing day, wasn't it?
It was a really I mean, Brett has never gone back to surf big waves again. You know, I think it was a wake-up call for Laird as well. I think he understood that moment that he was going to have to evolve his equipment to surf the bigger waves than he had surfed before. And he just, you know, to hear him talk about it, he couldn't move. He was staying still and moving backwards on this wave, and that's how he had never encountered anything like that before, and he realized what that would mean, that next level. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's really focused on foiling now, because that seems to be a frictionless way, and there's going to have to be more speed involved. But again, I think let's get Derek to talk about this.
And we will. There's a slide. I'm going to bypass just one slide here because
okay.
This is the last one before we're going to introduce Derek Donut to you, because he's a great wealth of talent. But this is, even out of the frame here, it was such a huge photograph, I couldn't even pull it down and do justice to it.
There's a little guy hanging up there.
There was a guy being winched, and you had to strain your eyes to even see him, and it was a recovery mission. And it was really fascinating in the book, Susan, when you were talking to some of the salvagers. And I thought of it again last week with the ship that was grounded off the coast of Italy, with all of the passengers on board and what went down there. It turns into a massive salvage operation. And can you explain what kind of an insight you got through these guys into the number of ships that go down, the treacherous conditions, the salvage operations, and what this is on the right-hand side here that kind of monitors all of that too?
The missing ships was a big part of the research that I did for the book and the reporting. And this is both related to that. The men on the left are from South Africa, and South Africa has the world's gnarliest salvagers. And the salvage, industrial, large-scale salvage operations are incredibly important environmentally, because a lot of these ships are oil tankers that are too big to go through the Suez Canal. So they're going around the tip of Africa, and there's a very fast-moving current called the Agulhas Current, like the Gulf Stream, but comes very close to shore, and then you get, from the Southern Ocean, these huge storms that come up with nothing blocking them. Huge, long fetch, giant winds, cold waters from Antarctica, and they hit the Agulhas Current, and it's like this giant oceanic train wreck. And it is the southeast coast of Africa is known as the Wild Coast. It's a rogue wave factory, and it's a rogue wave factory in one of the busiest shipping areas of the world. So there's 2 or 3 huge salvage companies, and they do a lot of the same very treacherous, very high-risk things that the extreme surfers do, but they do it with 100,000 tons of cyanide to get out of the hold, or a tanker full of oil, and they do all kinds of things to get people and chemicals off these ships before the ships break up. They try to tow the ships out so they don't get, again, basically broken in half, which is what happens to the big tankers when these waves move and they snap, like pencils almost.